I am very, very pleased to be restarting my podcast with a storyteller who I have been working with for quite a long time, actually, on and off. Unfortunately, most of that has been online. And I'm talking about Shereen Saif, who I'm going to be interviewing for this podcast right now. Shereen, welcome to my podcast.
Thank you. That was such a warm welcome.
Well, I do my best. But I've got a
Good.
question for you because what people might not know, people might know you as a storyteller because that's one of the faces of yourself that you present to the world, but you do a lot of stuff creatively. Could you give us the 5 minute introduction to Shereen Saif and her creative genius?
Wow, 5 minutes. That's a long time. I can do it shorter. But so I'm a multidisciplinary artist, Indian born and raised in the UAE. And I got into performing arts through classical dance. I'm a trained Indian classical dancer. I've trained in three different forms in Bharatanatyam, Kathak, and Mohiniyattam. Mohiniyattam is the form that I'm specializing in. And it was through dance when I felt dance was not enough to tell the things that I wanted to tell, especially Indian classical dance. Then I got into theater, and that was over I don't know, 12 years ago. Because then that was about me exploring voice and many other things and many other themes that I can explore outside of the Indian classical idiom. So theater is actually my first love, more than dance, and I think of myself as an actor first. And storytelling happened quite by chance. I was introduced to storytelling 5 years ago, not that long ago, by Paula Balbi, who both you and I know very, very well.
Very well
When
indeed.
when she came to the UAE with a storytelling, with the storytelling form, and also she organized these festivals at Sharjah, the Al Noor Island. Prior to that, I didn't know that storytelling was a legit profession, even. I always thought that this was what my granny did. Um,
Which it was, of course. I just want to pop in a little parenthesis here because we've mentioned someone else. We've mentioned Paula Balbi, and I'm sure she would not blush if I just said out loud that she, Paula Balbi, is the doyenne of Italian storytelling. She is front center, one of the greatest Italian storytellers, and I think she has many strengths. I think one of the strengths that impresses me constantly is her ability to form a team and to make things happen, including training, events, and festivals. So, and I'm hoping to do an interview with Paula at some stage if I can track her down and pin her in one place long enough in order
yeah.
for me to. I'm sure we'll have a great conversation. Anyway, that's just a little bit of background. Sorry, Shereen, I interrupted you. Could you just, because many storytellers that I've talked to, there's a moment when they go, aha, that's it. That's the thing. And I was wondering, now that we've actually talked about Paula and your experience 5 years ago of coming across storytelling, what did you have a similar moment, or for you, was it a different process of getting into storytelling?
It's interesting that you asked me that because obviously I got into storytelling with the two disciplines that I have, which is classical dance and theater. And when Paula came, she organized this sort of a cafe, a storytelling cafe where people from the general public were invited to come and see, share stories, etc. So I went to one of those casual evenings, and she said, would you like to share a story?" So I just got up and told a story the way I knew it. This was the legend from my land, from Kerala. It was a story of Vishnu and all of those things. So I just got up and I um, Davide, who you know very well,
Mhm.
her partner in crime, was there, and I said, "Davide, would you like to improvise with me?" And he goes, "Yes, why not?" So the two of us told a story. So he played the music, and I just told the story of this great king through movement, through words, through dance. And that's it. That's how I literally got into it. And then I realized at that point that I've always been telling stories. It's just that my format was different. I was telling stories as an actor, I was telling stories as a dancer, But this is completely different craft, you know. It has to sit in a different place. So I realized that, oh, I could also do this. This is interesting. And it just took off from there. And I knew that this is a very different craft. I mean, just because I'm an actor and dancer doesn't mean that I can be a good storyteller. I have to learn the craft. So I studied at Ahalya in Bangalore. I did a couple of workshops with Paula. I trained, under her a few things, and of course I trained under Michael Harvey, who I'm speaking to. So I've been fortunate to be mentored by a few good people, and so my journey continues. Yeah, so
Really
it's really
interesting,
kind of an
Shereen,
aha moment for
that
me.
you talk about craft, because obviously the craft in the dance is absolutely visible and clear. And I think one of the frustrations perhaps with storytelling is that what we do, we make it look easy. We make it look just like talking, but we do this thing whereby just using words and our presence and gestures and so on, we summon another reality into the room.
Mm.
And we could spend all day on this if we're not careful. I just want to ask you, maybe what are the one or two things that you think you as a storyteller you need to nail in order to make the magic happen?
Connection.
Say more about that.
It's basically, see, the thing is, the fourth wall is very much a part of your craft as an actor. I mean, having said that, these days the lines are blurring, and you have immersive theater when you can interact with the audience, etc. But you're playing a character in theater, and in dance, you are a dancer. You can't sort of break out of it and be yourself. But in storytelling, you can be your authentic self. Um, and you can also flit between these many things. You can be inside the story, you can be outside the story, you can be with the audience, you can really move that way. And the beauty is when you can present your authentic self. It can be a very polished performance, but to really connect with the audience, look at them eye to eye. If you don't build that bridge, I think that's the main thing in storytelling. Because otherwise I can do a very pretty performance and it can be quite dramatic in this, but if I'm not making that connection, and if I'm not my authentic self, if I'm not vulnerable, if I'm not open, if I'm not flexible, I'm not working as a storyteller.
That is such a profound observation, that we need to be authentic and vulnerable at the same time. I think in everyday life and in work and also in the arts, there's a temptation to try and get it right. Mm. And that's the last thing we should be doing. We shouldn't. Getting it right is boring. Right is functional. Right does the job, I suppose. But what we're interested in is authenticity, being yourself, turning up, and that's something we can't take our eyes off.
Yeah.
Shereen, I'd like to rewind actually to something you mentioned, and we've known each other for a few years now, and we met in Rome.
That's right. We met at the storytelling festival organized by Paula.
Exactly, and and we've met in the UAE as well. And you are an Indian.
That's right.
And you talked about your land being Kerala, but that's not where you live.
No.
So because I'm very interested in myth and landscape, and I would just love to ask you what your reflections are of someone who has a deep connection with a land, but doesn't live there. And how do you negotiate that? And where is home? And how do the myths work for you, and why? Because me as a Westerner, when I hear the myths, they're kind of disembodied. They're disentangled from the landscape in which they happen, or sometimes, of course, several landscapes where different groups of people feel that the story belongs. So obviously the stories, and you have a connection that one would call belonging, and also the land, but you don't live there. And I'd just like you to reflect on that.
Well, I'm a second generation Keralite, and I grew up here in the UAE. My parents came to work here. But every summer holidays, I went back home. It was a month, sometimes a month and a half. And so I've always been, in a way, connected to my land, not just through those visits, but through the language, through the food, through everything. I think what happens is a lot of the expatriates, when they go outside of the country, there is a way that they sort of hold on to their culture. My parents did. And they sort of passed down that love. Having said that, I didn't speak Malayalam, my mother tongue, very well because I went to school here and English is my thinking language. So if you ask me to tell a story in Malayalam, I would struggle. I mean, because I have a very conversational type of Malayalam. My thinking language is English. So I think would, is a bit, doesn't sit well, but I've sort of made my peace with that. But other than that, Indian classical dance, through Indian classical dance, I've always been connected to my roots, through the performing arts, through the music. So, so I'm very, very deeply connected to my home. And the thing is, because I'm a third culture kid, I'm someone who grew outside of India and outside of Kerala. I see the UAE as my home as well, because this is where I spend a good part of my life. So I think it's a good thing to belong here and there. It's possible. You can belong to two different places, no? So I feel very connected to home and very connected to this place that I call my home.
That's so interesting hearing you say that, because that word connection is then in a different context. We were talking about stories and connection, and now we're talking about culture and connection and family. Fascinating. I would like to change the subject, Shereen, if it's okay with you. And I'd like to talk about the show that you are currently developing and is nearing its, well, a state of readiness where it will soon be on tour. Please, Shereen,
Oh,
please tell us a bit about A Woman's Mind.
okay. So this story has been with me for a very, very long time. I was first introduced to this story when I was a 13-year-old girl in Bharatanatyam class. So this story of Ahalya is a tiny little, I think 4 or 5 line story from the Ramayana. That's it. And when you dance the story of Ramayana, it's always told from the perspective of Rama, or rather talking about Rama's greatness, of what a wonderful king he was, what a wonderful human he was, and about how he liberated this woman called Ahalya, who had been cursed to become a rock because she did some naughty things with Indra. Um, so, and I very clearly.
Sorry to interrupt, Shereen. Quickly explain to people who don't know who Indra is and
Oh,
what he's
Indra.
like.
Indra is, Indra is the god of rain and thunder and lightning, same. And he's also the king of the gods. He is, he's a very colorful god. He's very interested in the earth and women and all sorts of things. So he lusts after Ahalya and things happen. So that's Indra for you. um, so I remember very clearly when I was learning this piece on Rama about how Ahalya was depicted as this rock, and Rama is coming by and he steps on her, and out, poof, comes out this woman, liberated, and then they sing about Rama, and this woman's completely forgotten. No one knows her story, literally. So I just didn't feel right. I mean, firstly, because this man is stepping on top of this rock and a woman comes out and she's somehow, somewhere, it just didn't sit well with me. And much, much later, I mean, in recent times, a lot of writers have been interested, Indian writers have been interested in digging up a lot of mythology. So I read a few accounts of Ahalya written by a few writers, including Kavita Kani, including, oops, the name of that writer escapes me at the moment. So I remember reading about all of these things, and I want to tell her story, and I want to really find out who is Ahalya and who is Ahalya in her own story. So I started to dig up stuff, and I actually presented this very unresearched um, version of the story at Paola's festival in Rome for the first time.
Mm.
I just told it. It's a quite a colorful story. There's a curse, and it's got some female body parts involved, and all of those things. So I said it, and when I said it, I'm like, okay, this is entertaining, but there's more to Ahalya. So then it sort of stayed with me as a seed. And it's I've always thought that it's a risky story to tell because it's a story of seduction and, about sexual freedom. Um, it's about many things. And I was wondering if it would ever work in a place like the UAE, where you don't, A, talk about gods and goddesses, two, you don't talk about things that involve body parts, etc. So I thought, okay, I want to do this story, but maybe I can make this story and present it elsewhere. And so I started working on it with someone called Michael Harvey,
Oh, that man again.
dramaturge on this project. And literally, we've been cooking this for a while. And I got some funding from the Culture Foundation last year, the Abu Dhabi Cultural Foundation, to make this project. So it's a project now, and it was a huge surprise when the Cultural Foundation, in their debut production grant, included this project. So it just tells you this sort of a readiness and openness that you find in this country, which is very, very, very exciting. And this is one of many projects, 14 projects that they selected in the region. So I feel like this is the time, and I'm finally going to premiere it in the country that I thought I would never tell the story. So that's been my journey thus far, and I'm premiering this in September.
Well, congratulations. And I think perhaps you could mention that you're not the only person on stage in this production.
Oh, this is true, actually. Thanks for the reminder. So the beauty of this project, at least that's what I think of it, is it interweaves storytelling, music. It's live music. I have 3 musicians now. I have a third one who's just joined. I have a vocalist musician who also plays this thing called the surmandal, which is like the harp. I have a violinist now, and I have a percussionist. So he's going to play the tabla and a few other Indian instruments. So that's them, and it's me, and the two of us are the musicians, and I are going to bring this story to life. And so there's going to be a bit of dancing, a lot of talking, and it's a 1-hour show in English.
I am so looking. I have to. Obviously, I have an interest in this because I'm working with you. I'm directing you in the show, and it's also taking me back in time to a number of productions I made with a company here called India Dance Wales, where I was the storyteller, and I had to work out how to get because we were working often with Indian musicians and music that wasn't familiar to my ear, and I had to work out how to be present in the music and in the dancing and tell the story without falling over people, without interrupting people and so on. But I think that because both the music and the dance are public facing art forms, as is storytelling, there is a way in which they can work together because they all address the audience directly. So what is great about in classical Indian musicians is that for me, that's more like they behave more like jazz musicians. So they are themselves. Which if you go to a classical concert, the players, who of course are all fantastic, at a classical Western concert, they all look like they have some kind of belly complaint or headache or something. They're just not looking happy. They've got their concentrating faces on, and the idea is that they're invisible. But when, and I think especially because of the improvisational element that is inherent in Indian singing, dancing, and music, is that people are riffing off each other. And so you see the musicians clocking each other and smiling and having a great time. And that is infectious. And I think that's what we do as well as storytellers. We improvise. There's no, this is the thing that some people listening might not get. There is no script. If it's a script, it's another thing. We embody the story and we talk. The story that comes out of us. And those of you who have been looking at the video of this interview will have seen Shereen earlier on do some very interesting things when, I don't know if you knew you were doing it, Shereen, but you did quite a lot of embodiment and gaze work, just as you were talking about the story of Ahalya. You embodied it. You couldn't stop yourself from embodying it. And I think that's another really important thing, that it is all about bodies, bodies in space and bodies being present. So I don't know how much patience our lovely listeners have, but there's a couple of questions I'd just like to ask you. Number one thing that you're most proud of so far in this production and the process?
Ooh. Many things, actually. I think I'm proud of sticking with it, because as a storyteller, I am very, I'm in the moment, I don't really practice much. I don't really prepare. I know a story. It's inside of me, and I just like to see it come out of me, and each time it surprises me. So that's kind of my approach, and I would tell it live in performance, and then it becomes the story that is a bit more solidified. That's kind of has been my approach. This cannot be worked like that at all. You can't just let the story just come out of you. It's a 1 hour show. It cannot work like that. So for me, sticking with the story and telling the chunks and breaking the chunks down and understanding it more in more depth with more discipline, and so that's I'm really proud that I stuck with it.
Great.
With the method, trusting you, your process, which is very different from my process, introducing me to your process of working. I think I'm really fortunate to have learned the method, so to speak. Most people wouldn't think that storytellers have a method, and you just tell a story 100 times and then it becomes a story. But that's not true. So I'm really proud that I stuck with it. Number one.
Great. And I think about your dance background, I think that may have been indirectly a huge boon for you, because the idea of a storytelling practice isn't really evolved yet. But someone who has a practice like you, who knows that if you're going to get up on stage and dance, there are a whole lot of things you have to get right first that the audience won't see. And I think amongst some people, there is the idea that you, for a storyteller, you just get out there and do it. That's what it looks like. But actually, unless you've done the work, unless you've sorted out your chops, it's not going to look that good.
No.
Okay. That was the thing you were most proud of. I wonder if this next question is actually going to be the same kind of thing. But I was going to ask you what
I could think about more. But this is what came top of mind, that I've stuck with this project for more than a year now.
Yes.
Wow. That's something that's really, and seeing it through, the thing is, I'm also proud, because I've had to wear multiple hats in this particular occasion. I can't just be the storyteller who just appears, does a rehearsal, and just leaves. I have to be the production manager. I have to, think about resources. I have to think about many things, coordinating things. I have to be a project manager for this, end to end. I can't just be the artist. I'm proud of that too.
Good. Number one challenge, or is what you've just talked about the number one challenge?
No. Number one challenge is getting my musicians together to rehearse. Number one challenge. It's the most impossible task to do.
Get the same guys in the same room on the same day.
Impossible. Because, the thing with the UAE is most people are part-time artists. Or, for example, my musicians, they teach at Malhar. So they have a full-on teaching schedule. My percussionist works in an advertising agency. So his timings are late evenings. So trying to get everyone's, the stars to align is like super difficult. I don't know how it is in the UK, but it's really difficult here. And because I juggle many things. So apart from being a storyteller, there's my theater practice, or I might have a show. I do voice work. I do conceptual art and I do some consulting work. So just sort of like navigating through all of this and trying to match their schedule with mine. Oof, that's been the number one challenge for me.
There we are. Yeah, I think that's the you've got to get the right people in the right place at the right time, and it's not always easy. But I know that they will get it together, and it will be absolutely amazing.
They don't have a
And
choice.
okay, we are moving into a new phase because I will be coming to the UAE, and we will be in the same place at the same time. Finally,
I
hooray!
can't wait. I know you're going to rip this apart, and I'm waiting for it.
Zoom has been an absolute godsend during lockdown, and it's meant that several projects have happened that would never have happened otherwise, and that those of us who work culturally have been able to carry on working for a living. But I've just finished directing another project with another colleague, and we had a couple of weeks in the space. Chalk and cheese. It just being in that space, it's like things come together. When you're working on Zoom, you actually get a lot of work done in the time available. But I think this part of the process in any creative activity is hanging out, being with people, jamming, trying, playing, having a go. And then eventually you get to running it and polishing it and all the rest. But I think that being in the room and making yourself a performance tribe is really, really important. And that can't, I don't think, happen in the same way on Zoom.
No. I mean, having said that, my whole experience of working with you on Zoom has been really interesting, two-dimensional, but it's been because you have a track record of working with other artists and you're super comfortable on Zoom, and it's been really, really productive. But I know what you're like when you're in person in a room, like really looking at the details and like out comes the book and then like reams of paper you write down and things that you notice. You're super sharp when you're in that moment, and there are many things, I suppose, I don't know, there's something in Zoom that it's Zoom, and Zoom has its limitations, I suppose.
It does. Everything has its limitations, but I think there's maybe there's a blended thing that we can. But that's what we're going to be working with it anyway. Is
Yeah.
jumping through the Zoom screen and into real life. Okay, last question for you, Shereen Saif.
Yes, sir.
Magic wand time. If you had a magic wand and you were able to kind of transport yourself 5 years in the future, what are you doing with your storytelling?
That's a super easy question. More of what I'm already doing. Well, currently I spend 50% of my time as a consultant and 50% as an artist. It's that usual, sort of like, okay, I make this much money as an artist and this much money as a consultant. Okay, so I want to grow.
But for those of you listening on the podcast, the first this was like tiny, and the second this was larger.
Yeah. No, it's also because as an artist, the kind of work that you get, things are in ebb and flow. So I have this consulting practice. I do like my consulting practice. And in a way, I sort of shift out of my artist zone and get into that zone. And it sort of like helps me in the work that I do as an artist. So in 5 years, I hope to like really shrink my consulting practice to maybe like 20% of my time. But I still want to keep it. And then I want to spend more time as an artist. Hopefully, I would have published my book by then.
What's the book?
It's a book about a theater method that was developed by my guru, my teacher. It's called Navarasa Sadhana. So I've been writing. It's a technical book. It's for actors. So I've been slowly working on that. I realized writing a book is a full-time job. So I'm just allowing it to go at its own pace. In 5 years, I would have, I don't know, a couple of my own productions. I'd be touring. I would be, just doing more of what I love.
The book sounds really interesting. And you said it was about the Navarasas.
That's right.
Okay, you better explain to people who don't know what the Navarasas are. what they are?
Oh, the rasa theory, or the rasa, literally there's no translation in English. It means aesthetic relish. That's as close as you can get. That is discussed by this sage called Bharata in a textbook for theater. It's called the Natya Shastra. And in the Nadi Shastra, he talks about this rasa, and he comes up with what is called the Nava rasa, or rather the Ashta rasas. It's getting really complicated, but I'm going to try and like give you the sense of it. So these are sort of like, how do I put it? Like different, um, sort of, it's an emotional a space, you know. So you have, for example, the Shringara, which is the feeling of love, and then you have Karuna, pathos. So you have all these different aesthetic things that you, through a production, will allow your audience to feel.
Mm-hmm.
So you have, it's probably like very similar to the Greek thing, you know, like you have all these different shades of emotions. So you're allowing the audience to experience these shades of emotions, and we consider that there are 9 shades of emotions that through whatever we present, we will allow the audience to feel. So ultimately, whatever we make is about getting the audience to feel a resonance, an emotion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so sorry, did I complicate things?
No, not at all. That's really interesting.
You're gonna have to cut out a lot of this. I can get very excited when I talk about rasas. I can keep going on and on.
No, as you should, because it is a fascinating system of looking, a theatrical system of, because it's primarily theatrical, isn't it? It's about making the effect on the audience.
Yeah.
Absolutely fascinating. Shereen, tell us, when does the book come out?
Oh, the book. Well, the thing is, I'm working on this book with my teacher. It's his method. So I interview him, and then I do my own research and I put it together. Then I show him the first draft. He reads it, and then he says, "What about this? What about that?" So we're working on it together. I'm writing it and researching it, etc. We've been working on it for like 2 years. It's just that both of us have, it's time again, you know, to come together. So I'm hoping it would be at some stage by the end of next year.
Well, I am personally looking forward to getting a copy. And I'm sure it will teach me a lot. When I was working with India Dance Wales, we encountered the Navarasas, but we were too busy making the show to really get into it. And it's something that I think would be of use to any cultural or creative person, to be honest with you. So when it comes out, buy the book. Shereen Saif, it's been lovely as ever talking to you and finding out yet more about what an inspiring creative artist you are. And yes, and we are looking forward to actually being in the same place at the same time in the UAE before too long, in order to make this show an amazing thing of beauty and amazement.
You did well.
So, Shereen, thanks very much, and looking forward to working with you soon.
Likewise. See you soon.